support for this whole effort and for the many other things that we're doing in this area. I once had the experience of having Dean Kelly go with me to Kenya with the understanding that while he was there, he had to work for me instead of me working for him. And he actually was a very good worker. We built some bridges and did some really pretty neat things, and had a wonderful time being there together. So I'm thankful to have somebody who's in a position of leadership in our school who's also very committed to these kinds of integrated activities. So let me introduce Dean Ben Kelly to share briefly with you a word of greeting.
Yes, Walter, I did hear that briefly with you, a word of greeting. There are several things we do well at Baylor. One is eat. We say we often eat on behalf of Baylor. But we also welcome people to Baylor very well, I think, and do that very often also. And it is indeed a pleasure to see all of you here on campus, all of you here for a good reason. And I did indeed go with Dr. Bradley to Kenya, and while he says it was a good trip and so forth, I sympathize somewhat with the organizers of this conference, because he works you hard, and he works you long, and he works you every day, but he does wonderful things. And I do, on behalf of the school, Baylor School of Engineering and Computer Science, welcome you here to this conference. And the sessions I've attended are just so well organized, and the slate of speakers is just outstanding that I know you're getting just as much of it out as I can. So on behalf of Baylor, on behalf of the school, again, welcome. We're glad you're here and know you're having a fine experience.
There's a nice description of Dr. Paul Polak's accomplishments if you look in your program. And I won't review all of those except to say that as somebody who's relatively new to this whole area, appropriate technology, Paul was one of my early heroes and somebody who has taught me some really key things, even though I've only had contact with him several times. Each time has been really significant. When I first met him at a conference where he was speaking in Boulder, Colorado, I can remember very specifically, I came back with the real understanding that if you're going to help a lot of people in developing countries who need help, you need to figure out market-driven, bottom-up ways of doing things. You notice the conference title is something that, in a sense, was first an idea that I learned from Paul's talk. He said that everybody's got to be able to make it in the food chain, or it's not going to work. And he's right. I think a lot of things that we do to try to help people are things that are donor-driven, that limits them in size and it limits them in sustainability. And I appreciated last night Cesar's comments with regard to what people need is not help, but economic empowerment. And there's a real fundamental difference there. The second thing that Paul taught me was, he said, there are three important rules of appropriate technology, and it's cheap, cheap, and cheap. Okay? And as he shares tonight, this afternoon, he'll be sharing some examples of what he really means by that, but it's like real estate where they say it's location, 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 and appropriate technology is cheap, cheap, cheap. At a subsequent conference sponsored by the National Collegiate Inventors and Innovators Association, Paul is again a keynote speaker. Every place he goes, he's a keynote speaker because what he has to say is so significant. And at this conference, he was talking very, very eloquently about the need to learn to listen to your customer, okay? And some of you who heard Ray Norman speak yesterday afternoon, he gave some wonderful examples of the consequences of not doing that and what he has learned along the way. And Paul has also shared some terrific examples. On the way from the airport today, he gave me 3 or 4 different emphases for his talk as his customer and said, now tell me exactly what you would prefer given the finite time we have. And so I shared with him my priorities, and he said fine, and then he took some time to finalize his talk. But even when he goes out to speak, he practices what he does when he goes out to practice appropriate technology. Talk to your customer, understand exactly what their needs are, and I just find it to be a terrific inspiration. There are literally millions of families around the world who are very poor farmers who are now making 3 times as much per year as they were before. Millions of families tripling their income based on the vision and the work of one person. And there aren't very many people that can say that they've had that kind of impact. Oddly enough, Paul was trained as a psychiatrist, and I had no idea. We talked about this, about how a guy who's a psychiatrist ends up being such a great entrepreneur and so many clever engineering ideas. But he's been specially gifted, I think, to do the things that he's doing. And you're going to be very much blessed and treated by what he's going to share. Paul, come up. We are so glad you're here.
It's really great to be here. Thank you for inviting me. How's the conference going so far? Enjoying it? I've had a look at some of the schedule, and sometimes I like to start by just asking a few people, as I did in the car on the way over, what would you like to hear? And can I ask you, sir, you did the both thumbs up about the conference so far, and you don't probably know much about who I am or what, but is there anything specially that you're curious about that you'd like me to?
By the title, that what works?
Yeah, what works when traditional approaches fail? I'll be going into that. A couple of other ideas.
Define poverty. That was one.
What's that?
How do you really define poverty? That was one of the big discussions we had.
How do you define poverty?
What is really poverty?
Yeah. Yes, sir.
As one of the examples of an organization that's been able to scale to the size that you have, how have you been able to do that? I think that's really interesting to know about.
So just, I mean, in terms of scale, I'm now officially, I handed over IDE, the organization that I started, and they gave me the title of founder. And I, occasionally when I sign a letter founder, I put L in there right after the F. And part of the reason is that flounders have scale built in. You see, and so I'll be talking about scale, and in terms of what is poverty, part of the thing is, who cares what I think? In fact, who cares what you think? To me, the real question is, how do poor people themselves define their poverty? And so that's, I've interviewed 3,000 of them, and there are different types of poverty, different levels of poverty, different factors, there's all of that stuff. But when you talk to poor people themselves who live on less than $1 a day, these are families then that are going hungry 3 months a year. When I ask them why they're poor, they say they're poor because they don't have enough money. So I believe them. And a lot of what we did was focused on that. Now, that's not to deny all the other things, but money is a very important thing. Sir, you either have a bad arm or you have something that you want to say.
I would love to hear what you say about assessing the social and environmental impact of your work. How do you do that?
I make it up because you can get much more impressive results that way. And no, it's related to this question. The first thing is what we're trying to do is help $1-a-day farmers increase their income. So we have various ways of measuring whether we've increased their income or not. And we compare it with people who haven't done some of the things that we've been involved in. We hired a guy named Tushar Shah, who's an independent evaluator. He did a study, for instance, about the socioeconomic impact of the Treadle pump. All of the data shows that a Treadle pump costs $25 and it adds at least $100 to income net per year. And he confirmed that. He said that number was conservative. But the other thing is, I talk to customers. So when I started out 28 years ago with IDE, I said I would interview 100 poor farmers every year, and I've done that. So I've talked to people after they've benefit or not benefited from what we've done, and I learn a lot from them. And in reality, income at the lower level is really critical simply as a tool, not as an end in itself, because if you're on the edge of survival and you have more income, you, not the experts, can decide where to invest it. And where do the poor farmers invest it? In places like Bangladesh and Zambia. They invested in educating their kids, continuing to improve their farming, improving their housing. They have money now where they can buy medicines if somebody is sick. They invested in all the things that you would think of and that the experts argue about in terms of what is a real cause of poverty. And powerlessness is another thing. And by the way, I'm going to shut this off after a minute, and we will have lots of discussion as we go on, but you had something you wanted to say in the back.
I don't know what grassroots or local groups you may partner with, but do you ever partner with, let's say, mutual help or church-related organizations that might have trouble changing their mode of thinking from charity to entrepreneurship?
Yes, and in those instances, we try to use force. Because yeah, we've had a whole variety of experiences, and some people we just can't partner with because we do things differently. But that's not to say that that's church groups. We worked a lot in India in the beginning with grassroots NGOs. When we were, first big project was with Treadle pumps, and I do want to present that information to you so we have some more information shared and we can keep discussing. But we did that by doing it totally through activating the private sector. So all of the Treadle pumps were sold at a fair market value with no subsidy. And we encouraged thousands of village dealers to sell Treadle pumps at a 12% margin. Now we had NGOs that were interested. So they also were distributing Treadle pumps, but they started they said when these people are so poor, it's immoral for us to make money on them. We're going to make them available without a margin. And we said, you can't do that. Because if you do that, then you're undercutting the dealers who are earning a livelihood. And when we leave, that's the only sustainable way that people will keep getting Treadle pumps. So in the end, we would simply, if we couldn't negotiate that, we would stop making Treadle pumps that were under our control available to these. So it's an ongoing problem. One more question, and then yes, sir.
What are the major inhibitors to the scale of capital formation that's necessary to attack this subject of poor poverty?
The main inhibitors to the scale of capital formation to scale up a thing for poor farmers? I think that there are a number of things, but I would say that the first real constraint is stupidity. Because people try to make tools or recommend tools that are Western tools that are too expensive and too big. And you can never, no matter how much capital you have, you can't sell combines. You know, I'm just making it ridiculous, but you have to have the right tools. You have to then have tools, the rule that we were talking about. It's got to be affordable enough. It's got to be low priced enough to be affordable for somebody who lives on $1 a day and has a lot of competing demands for the money. It's got to earn at least, it's got to at least pay for itself in the first growing season. Now if you have those things, people themselves have a constraint of capital to buy, but there's much more capital than I ever realized. It's just that they can't afford to blow it, because that means they'll lose their land. They're saving it for their daughter's dowry. So then going through the whole list, then if you have credit, a lot of people who simply can't afford it, even if it is cheap, can have access to it. But it's got to be real credit where they have to pay the loan back. Why don't I just give you some information quickly, and then I really enjoy the interaction, and so we'll keep doing that during the whole thing, if that's good, remains good for you. Just to put some numbers on it, I start from how many people in the world there are who live on less than $1 a day and less than $2 a day. It's about 2.7 billion people who live on less than $1 a day, 1.2 billion who live on less than $1 a day. So if you take $2 a day or less, it's 2.7 billion. It's just about half of the world's population. These are what some of these people who are my teachers and friends look like. And most of you who've been to developing countries have seen lots of people like this. I'll talk later about how many of these people are rural and earn their livelihood from farming, but I want to start right away by saying that what we're doing now about poverty simply isn't working, in my opinion. Most of you have probably heard about the Millennium Development Goal movement. Have all of you heard of that? Or, yeah, a lot of nodding. The group of 186 countries agreed to commit to achieving some very ambitious goals by the year 2015, and now it's getting pretty close to the year 2015. But here is an example of the actual results. So in sub-Saharan Africa, one of the key goals, in my opinion, is to cut in half the percentage of people who live on less than $1 a day. In sub-Saharan Africa, between 1990 and 2002, about halfway through the Millennium Goal movement, the percentage of people who lived on less than $1 a day plummeted from 44.6 to 44.0%. Yes, sir.
But that's not characteristic, is it? Because it's dropped in other parts of the world, and even in sub-Saharan Africa, it dropped up to around 1990. Then when the AIDS epidemic that caused a rebound in poverty rates, and then after 2002, then the poverty rates started falling again, didn't they? I mean, that's not fully characteristic of the progress in the whole world, is it?
Oh, never mind. No, I'm sorry. I'm not really making light of this. The data is complicated, but in the big picture, the actual absolute numbers of $1-a-day people have gone up in sub-Saharan Africa. This is percentages, and the percentage and the absolute numbers of people under $2 a day have gone up. And HIV/AIDS is a major factor. But there are a lot of other major factors. What's unfair about this example is using sub-Saharan Africa. I don't think there are changes, but I don't think anybody would disagree that that is the biggest challenge in development. Now, if you look at the same numbers for Asia, they are much more positive. But if you look behind those numbers, much of the drop in $1-a-day people in percentage comes from China. And that drop is not related to any of the Millennium initiatives or, in fact, the poverty programs. It's related to the fact that Mao died and some of his insane policies, which helped something like 40 million people starve to death, were stopped. And in fact, some new policies which led to decollectivization and free market forces, that really did probably drop the levels of poverty, but I personally am suspicious of all the official numbers anyway, because having traveled to a lot of places in China, a lot of numbers are made up. Although I think the Millennium numbers are more accurate. Well, maybe this is a good example. There are no really clear, you can't say absolutely anything. So what I'm saying, and I may be wrong and you may have a clearer view of it and a better opinion. But in my view, just taking the Millennium Development Goals as an example and combining it with what I see on the ground, most of our poverty efforts, in my opinion, have failed. Does that fit with your view or not?
Yeah, and I agree with you about China. 400 million people with that reduction was from China alone.
Yeah.
But I'm just not trying to give you a hard time. It's just the fact that that's sub-Saharan Africa is a special case.
It is. It is. But if you take dollar-a-day poverty, which is the area that I'm most familiar with, the initiatives to end poverty are failing. That's my conclusion, and I'm putting it out there because, and this is what I did in the book. I tell it like it is from my point of view, and a lot of people may not agree with me. But I'll say a little bit more about why that is. By the way, this is the family that I describe in the book, Krishna Badur Thapa, a family in the hills of Nepal. In my view, one of the reasons that what we do now doesn't work is what I call the 3 great poverty eradication myths. The first is that we can donate people out of poverty. The lady asked about the churches. Some churches have been charitable to poor people's detriment. Others are not. I've worked with many church groups who do amazing things in the field. But unfortunately, Jeff Sachs, who is the leader of the UN Millennium Movement, he's a renowned economist. His basic belief is there's a global village movement that he leads. His belief is that dollar-a-day people, for instance, are too poor to invest in their own end of poverty, that you have to really bring things in. If you bring in, if you make a major investment in a very poor village, you bring in irrigation, you bring in health, you bring in roads, you bring in infrastructure. At some point, the market will take off. They'll have the resources to move out of poverty. Unfortunately, what happens is if you pour a huge amount of outside money into an area, the first thing that comes in are the quick buck artists who have Swiss bank accounts. I'm overstating it, but what happens is that if you have a group of global experts on rice production, and you have fertilizer, and you have irrigation, you can triple rice yields. When the experts go away, it all settles back to pretty much where it was. So you can't donate people out of poverty. And again, through all of this, I'm saying what my belief is. I've had a lot of experience at the grassroots, so-called, but it's seen through my eyes, so I'm not saying I'm right. I'm saying what I've concluded. In my opinion, poor people have to invest their own time and money to move out of poverty. That said, they need a lot of help. They have a lot of constraints. We can help them remove some of those constraints, but they have to be active investors in the end of their poverty. The second myth is one that is loved by many macroeconomists. And in fact, a lot of the World Bank economists, pretty much it's accepted as a given. If you have consistent per capita GDP growth in any country, you'll move out of poverty. That's based on the fact that since the Industrial Revolution, before the Industrial Revolution, 80% of the people in the world were desperately poor. Now it's only 20%, and that's because waves of economic growth. And the assumption is that the past predicts the future, which a lot of stock market analysts now believe is not necessarily always true. With these waves of successive growth, there are important groups left behind. What's left behind, especially in these waves of growth, are isolated, poor rural people, which represent 75% of the 1.2 billion dollar a day people. And it seems so silly to me. If you look at India, it's had a sustained 8% GDP per capita growth rate for years. It has 300 million people who are hungry. Growth, it does have an impact on the village. There is some trickle down, but you need growth at the village. National growth tends to be urban and industrial, and it bypasses important groups that are left behind. Final one is that multinationals, as they are now, will end poverty. When I started in development, multinationals were seen as the root cause of poverty. They were ripping off poor people. They were keeping poor people down. Now there is a movement that sees multinationals as white knights ready to slay the poverty dragon. They are, in fact, neither of those. They're simply multinationals. It's an organizational structure for doing business. What the impact it has depends on who manages it and what the business does. The reason I think this is one of the most pernicious of the myths is that I think multinationals do indeed have tremendous potential to make a positive impact on poverty, but you can't do it by making cosmetic changes in an existing product line and trying to peddle it in emerging markets. What's needed is a revolution in how big business designs, prices, and markets its products. I'll say more about that later. I'm going to go another 5 or 10 minutes and then have another chance to discuss. Now, so what I want to talk about now is how so much of dollar-a-day poverty is rural and how the solutions to it are not that complicated and fairly obvious, and what IDE, the organization that I started, did that worked, but there's a lot of poor people left. About 800 million, between 800 and 850 million of the one. By the way, we can make this PowerPoint available, so you don't have to take notes totally, whatever you like. Small farms are incredibly important in the world, not just in poverty. There are 525 million farms in the world. Of those, 85% are smaller than 5 acres. You wouldn't dream that that was the case if you looked at any cutting-edge agriculture journal. You rarely see an article on the best way to raise 3 goats. Average farm size in Africa is 4 acres. That means farmers who earn less than $1 a day or much smaller. About half of all cultivated land in many developing countries is less than 5 acres. So my conclusion is small farmer prosperity is the key to ending dollar-a-day poverty. And without giving you a whole bunch of theory, I want to give you the example of the technology we cut our teeth on. The first project, when I started IDE, I was the only employee, and the office was my house in Arvada, Colorado. We then did a project in Somalia where we helped blacksmiths build 500 donkey carts in the refugee camps of Somalia. That was a very interesting project. We learned a lot from it. Then what we really cut our teeth on, and what has informed everything else, was a Treadle pump project. In the very first interviews with small farmers, I asked them why they were poor and what they needed to get out of poverty. They said they needed to improve their livelihood from farming, and the biggest constraint they had, and this is true everywhere that I've been, very common constraint is water control for their crops. They grow, most of them live on land that isn't that great. They don't have irrigation. They grow their crops in the monsoon rains when everybody else grows them. That's fine for growing stuff to eat, but if they want to make some money by selling their crops, everybody else produces the crops and the prices are low, and you can't make money growing rice, wheat, and corn anyway. It's important for your own, to keep your family from going hungry. So they need water control. So somebody told us, and this was in Bangladesh, about the Treadle pump, a pump that I didn't develop, or IDE didn't develop, but an engineer named Gunnar Barnes from Norway decided to, most of Bangladesh sits on water in the dry season that is 12 feet below the farmer's feet, because it rains so much in the monsoon season. And yet, it's in the dry season, not too much of value is grown because there isn't enough rain. So the possibility exists. You drill a simple well, you put a pump on it, you suck the water up with a straw, and you irrigate some vegetables in the dry season. That's the Treadle pump. So the Treadle pump is $8 in Bangladesh. To drill a tube well, put a pipe down, the filter on the bottom. The whole thing is $25. That's with a profit on the part of the manufacturer, the village dealer, and the well driller. So what we did is, and now we get into the relationship between technology and success. In my experience, designing an appropriate technology or an affordable technology that really works, most of them don't because they're not customer driven. If you've designed a potential breakthrough technology, you're about 20% of the way there. The rest of it is marketing and distribution, which is the same as any business. There are lots of businesses that have breakthrough products and they don't have a clue about how to market them and nothing happens. So you've got to be focused on the marketing. So we created a private sector supply chain in Bangladesh consisting of 75 private sector manufacturers. These were little workshops with a welder. It cost about $2,000 or $3,000 in capital. They were already there anyway, making welding bed springs and things like that. We recruited in the end 2,000 to 3,000 village dealers who sold the Treadle pumps at a 12% margin. And we ran a training program for, in the end, close to 3,000 well drillers. These are village tinkerers who install the Treadle pump. They charge 5 cents a foot. We gave them a certificate at the end of the 3-day training program. That was the private sector supply chain. This is what a dealer looks like in Bangladesh. It's not quite the same as an agricultural implements dealer in this part of Texas. This is actually one of the IDE staff giving a training program and marketing session in Zambia to people who might be interested in Treadle pump. Here is a manufacturer. You notice the OSHA regulation footwear. But he's actually welding the base of the Treadle pump. And now we come to marketing and distribution. Here's this talks about distribution, but marketing. Problem with Treadle pumps, nobody knew what they were. It's like a politician without name recognition. And you now have in Bangladesh, about half of the people didn't read and write, and there was no mass media. So how do you get the word out? And how do you? So the first thing we did is recruited some village troubadours. That's culturally quite common. We had 3 troubadour teams that we paid under the project. They wrote a song about the Treadle pump, and they performed with their little orchestra at village markets, which is where farmers come. and at the big festivals. This is a song about a treadle pump. There's a guy on a treadle pump in the corner, which is a recirculating water, and there's another guy handing out leaflets for the nearest dealer. But this didn't reach as many people as we wanted. So we made a Bollywood movie. We actually did. We did one every year. In Bangladesh, you could hire the top movie director, the top male lead, and the top female lead. They were, of course, interested in helping. It cost $25,000 to produce a 90-minute movie. And we hired a Bangladeshi marketing firm. Mirnal Sarkar is a very bright guy. He stayed then with IDE for a long time. He designed the key messages we wanted to put into the movie. But it's got to be a locally meaningful movie. So in Bangladesh, a popular movie has a wedding, a funeral, a near suicide, and lots of singing and dancing. So they came up with this really sort of Nobel Prize-winning storyline. Boy meets girl. They want to get married, but her father is too poor to provide the dowry. As many of you know, in many Asian countries, you've got to provide a significant dowry if you want your daughter to be married to somebody with enough earning power to take care of her. That's the way the thing goes. But a lot of times, that amounts to a net income of a small farmer for a year. But sometimes it doesn't work out. You also got dowry bandits, people who present themselves as good grooms and their family presents them, and then they take the dowry and they either kill the wife or send her back home and do it again. So the plot is they want to get married, but they can't get married. Her father doesn't have enough money, so she falls into the clutches of a dowry bandit. Weeping, gnashing, near suicide, singing and dancing, and then at the climax, the movie stops. And the dealers, and by the way, these movies, typical audience was 3,000 to 5,000, open air settings, played with a generator, as you can see here. Then the dealers who are invited, who have brought their potential customers, get them up on treadle pumps. So they can try out the merchandise, and they talk about that. And then the movie resumes, and the father runs into an old friend from school who tells him about what? The treadle pump. So he buys a treadle pump, makes lots of money, they get married and live happily ever afterwards. Now, that played to 1 million people a year. So here's the end of the story. In Bangladesh alone, well, this is actually now goes beyond Bangladesh. In Bangladesh, Myanmar, Zambia, Cambodia, Nepal, IDE staff, who are local people, have stimulated market mechanisms to sell 2.1 million treadle pumps. And each one going to a family. The families have invested more than $50 million of their own money. These are dollar-a-day families. And they've increased their income by $210 million a year forever. That's just with a treadle pump. IDE grew to an organization with 550 staff. Over 25 years, some 17 million people have moved out of poverty, investing their own time and money. And IDE's mission is to reach 150 million more. And here is, I think that all development projects ought to have measurable impacts and scalability. So I sat down and put together the numbers for the first 25 years of IDE. IDE had $78 million in grants and contributions. It's a nonprofit operating as a business. Poor people themselves invested $139 million. And they increased their net annual income by $288 million a year. And I think those numbers can be replicated by anybody in this room. The approach is fairly simple and obvious, and I'll talk to you more about it later. But this is a time I'd like to stop and get your reactions and questions. Yes, sir.
Are there specific countries that you found that you just can't get into or can't help the people because the governments are so oppressive and so uncooperative, or have you been able to make this succeed wherever you try it?
We failed in some places. We failed in a lot of places and a lot of projects. I don't know about a lot, but actually our failure rate is pretty low because we go through a process. But for instance, what kind of countries are you thinking of?
Well, countries where the government is either oppressive or incompetent or some combination of both. They don't support any sort
Oh, the U.S. No, I'm sorry. No, we work, for instance, in Myanmar. I've been there for 5 years, and the program has been very successful. We also have been in Zimbabwe. The program there has not been as successful. But we were working in the Maoist villages in Nepal through the whole Maoist period. We tried to work in Haiti, and that didn't work. But that was more our picking wrong leadership or whatever we did. It's entirely possible to work under any government system, is my experience. That said, I'm not ready to go to Iraq at this point. Does that answer your question? These things, but again, that takes a lot more than just the technology and the things we've talked about. And that takes having superb local staff who know the women in the Maoist village. The women give guidance about when to come. We had to come in and do something that increased their income really fast. But a lot of the Maoists backed us. Some of them didn't. In this case, it was low-cost drip irrigation, and when women started adding $500 a year in net income, there ain't no way the Maoists would have kept us out.
So it's case-by-case basis. You have to find out what will work in that specific location. It's different from one.
You know, it's what we're saying from the beginning. You got to talk to customers, and you got to know the local culture. And IDE's 550 staff. There are 13 at headquarters. All the rest are in the field, and they're virtually all local people. So they are from that culture, and after a period of time, they're really very good. Yes.
Given the timing of the Treadle pump, it sounds like it would have been started in Bangladesh in the same early years as Mohammed Yunus started with the Grameen Bank.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering what kind of overlap there might have been as he was sort of marketing the bank in his early years.
Mohammed Yunus in the early years and the Grameen Bank sold 25,000 Treadle pumps through their own organization. We had some talk about they wanted to have their own dealers. Our dealers didn't like it, our staff didn't like it, but it worked out fine. The only kind of, and I think microcredit is a very important piece of this, but it's not the solution any more than Treadle pumps are the solution. It's a tool. And I talked to Mohammed Yunus about combining microcredit with what I called killer technologies, some technologies that give you a 300 to 400% return combined with microcredit. He's not interested. There are different schools of thought in microcredit, but that's another story. A couple of other questions, and then, yes, sir.
What kind of resources do these farmers have as far as maintenance on these pumps, if they should break down or anything
The way you ask the question is what kind of resources do the farmers have? It sounds like farmers need to have resources to fix them, right? I mean, that's what the assumption is in your question?
Correct. Or do they have education? Do they have people
No.
nearby that can fix them for them?
No,
So what happens when their pumps break down?
they fix them.
So they have the education to fix their own pumps, is what I was saying.
No. I'm teasing you a little bit, but part of the thing is design. You, huh? No, no. The pumps break. You never design something to be flawless, but you make the design so simple and you use materials that are easily obtainable so people can fix them themselves. That's what an elegant design is. So the valves there's a piston rod and a seal, which is leather. And in the early Treadle pumps, the flap valve was made of inner tube rubber. And the pump is easy to take apart. A farmer looks at that, and if the flap valve goes out, he finds a tube. Cuts it with a pair of scissors. You don't need an education for that. And in fact, the people without an education are often more educated than the people with it. It's amazing the resourcefulness they have, even though they may be illiterate. So part of the thing is, but if you design something, you got to design something to be fixable. That's and then these people are very clever. And the most reassuring thing going around talking to people with treadle pumps is seeing people with treadle pumps that were hanging by a thread and they fixed it with a piece of wire. That's the thing about the design. You've got to make the design transparently understandable and fixable with local materials. Does that make sense to you? It's about the design and relying on the ingenuity of the people. Yes?
The design of the treadle pump, you said, is 20% of the solution, and 80% is supply chain, manufacturing, and marketing, and so forth. When you were new to this field, how do you track the capital necessary to set up the supply chain, manufacturing, and marketing?
I begged a lot. I cried. Well, I'm not the best person to describe this because I tend to do what seems obvious and then I learn that it's not necessarily obvious. But like in the beginning, we didn't have any reputation to attract a grant. But some of the board members that were with me as the founders of this organization were Mennonites. And they were involved with an organization called MEDA, Mennonite Economic Development Associates. It's a microcredit group. They thought it was a good idea, so they applied to CEDA, the government of Canada, for a grant. $250,000 a year for 3 years called Marketing Appropriate Technology. And then they subcontracted to us. And we did that with the first grant for the donkey carts, too. And after that, we had our own reputation. But, I mean, there are a lot of ways that different people do that. That's what we did. Yes?
Have you done this with other products besides the treadle pump?
Yes, I'll come to that. Like IDE is now working on 13 different affordable irrigation technologies. And the problem is I'm going to run out of time, but the same principles apply to all kinds of technologies in all kinds of fields. Couple more things, and then how long do we go till
5 o'clock.
Till 5 o'clock? So we've got 40 minutes, and keep telling. Let me know how much we should spend interacting like this, and whether you want more material. Yes.
What do you do for the spiritual care? Do you look at the spiritual element in development?
I do personally. Yes. What? It's not a formally affiliated organization. Some of our staff are Muslim, some are Buddhist, many are Christian. For me, I'm not a churchgoer, but my wife is a Mennonite minister. figure that one out. But for me personally, this work is related to deeper connections, and I'm doing what I was put here to do. If you're talking about spiritual care for our customers, it really, that's not part of our work. But I think if people tell me things like the Treadle pump is a gift from God. That's what they say. But that person was a Muslim. So I think there's a spiritual part of this, and a lot of the Mennonite Central Committee people that I've worked with, they're much more formally, and yet they don't make demands of people to be members of their church. How about this? One or two more things, and then shall we do more information? I don't want to there's far more that I can present than we have time for. Keep going? Yes, sir.
You started by sharing something about Africa, which got my attention, and I'm interested to know how effective in the last 25 years has the Treadle pump deal been in Africa, and if it has not been, which appears to be the impression you conveyed, if I got it correctly, why has that been the case?
Oh, that's not true. The Treadle pump has worked, and other organizations have taken it up. Kickstart.
In which African countries have you seen success?
With the Treadle pump? An organization like Kickstart has worked extensively in Kenya. Kenya and Tanzania, they've installed 70,000 Treadle pumps. I think it's 80,000 now, primarily in those two countries. We've done some work with Treadle pumps in Zambia. We're doing a number of different pumps in Ethiopia. But the Treadle pump is not a solution. There's in irrigation, there's water lifting, water distribution, and water storage. The Treadle pump only works, it's a suction pump, so it only works with very shallow water tables. That means that in many parts of Africa, the water is too deep for a Treadle pump. Rope and washer pump is another pump that works somewhat deeper. But if you are in areas where the water table is deeper and you're using human labor, the deeper it is, the less water you can use with human power to get enough up to irrigate something. So there are many of these things that are applicable to Africa. Drip irrigation, low-cost drip irrigation, we've sold 500,000 low-cost drip irrigation systems. Here is a $3 drip irrigation system. This is for a kitchen garden. Women carry water in Africa to their household and everywhere in the world. This will hold a bucket of water. You hang this from a post. To cut the cost of lateral lines in drip irrigation, we made them into very thin wall tubes, because if you lower the pressure, you're holding this post up at shoulder length, shoulder height, very little pressure. This is what you put out in the field in tubing. When this fills up with water, it becomes round. And instead of high-tech laterals, the farmer drills a hole with a punch and puts in a microtube. This is what the tubing looks like. You can pass it around. Here are some microtubes that replace emitters. You drill a hole. Sure, catch. See, nothing to worry about. And here's what this looks like in the field. So with an investment of $3, used to be $1 before the price of oil went up, a woman can drip irrigate a kitchen garden, 20 square meters, about 250 square feet. Improve her children's family's diet and earn $10 and then double the size of it the next year. All our drip irrigation systems are like that. You can go all the way up to 5 acres with them, but they use low pressure. Are you ready now? She's not flinching nearly as much. Oh, and here, have a look at this too. You can just pass that around like. So, does that give you an idea? All of these things work in Africa. In a lot of places, the water table is much deeper, but you can pump water out of rivers. There's a lot of rivers in Africa. There are a lot of places where farmers are growing vegetables for town and peri-urban markets. There are huge opportunities to do this kind of work in Africa. Let's go ahead a little bit. The other thing we decided that would be high priority here is what I describe in the book. It's 12 steps to practical problem solving. When I was writing the book, the publisher, the editor, sort of pushed me to say, haven't you learned anything in 25 years that applies to other problems? And I thought that was a little hokey because everybody has, there's 12 steps, alcohol programs, and but in the end, this chapter is the one that people find very useful. And the first 3 steps are the most important. And I have some video clips to give you an idea of how this works, or at least how I do it. I'm going to turn the lights down. You turn this. Oh, but people fall asleep. So the first of these is with any problem, whether it's homelessness or problems that you have here. First step is go to where the action is. It's amazing how often people don't do that. The head of FEMA, you remember that situation where he was interviewed on national television about the people in the Coliseum, and he didn't know there were any 4 days after. And all the reporters had been to the Coliseum and to the football stadium. What prevented him from doing the same thing that the reporters did? How can you make a plan for a disaster response if you don't do that? The second thing is talk to the people that have the problem and listen to what they have to say. A lot of people never talk to the people with the problem as customers. So what I'm describing to you is how it changed my whole approach to this profoundly by learning from poor people and the 1 acre farmers. And listening is much more than listening with your ears. It's I always walk through the fields with the farmer, see what they're growing. I go to the markets. You're looking at whether the roof is thatch or corrugated tin. Does the farmer have a watch? What are they eating? I go to a village and I spend 4 or 5 hours with one family and I ask them everything. What they eat, how much money they earn, from what do they spend it on. And then I go talk to another 15 or 20 farmers for an hour or so. At the end of that, you learn an enormous amount. And finally, learn everything there is to know about the specific context. So here is a very simple fact that I didn't know till I did this, but I knew immediately when I went to the context. Most dollar-a-day poverty is on 1 acre farms. And they're not one piece, 1 acre, it's 4 or 5 quarter acre plots. The practical ways to end dollar-a-day poverty have to start with improving the income from farming of 1 acre farmers. That's very simple, but that's not the way we've been looking at poverty. The Gates Foundation is now doing that, very much oriented that way, the Global Development Division. So I thought it might be of interest to you if any of you, those of you who have read my book, I talked about some of the early days in which I learned to do this. I did this with psychiatric patients. I went to their homes. They were being admitted to a state hospital with 1,000 of them, we put them in the car and went back to where they came from and learned about their environment. About 35 years ago, one of the first videos I made, I was interested in the problem of homelessness. I don't know, anybody here interested in homelessness or working with homeless? Oh my goodness. Okay, so I talked to Mary Ann Gleason, who is a friend of mine. She was a nun, and she introduced me to Joe, who lived under a loading dock in the railroad yard. And here's a film clip of Joe taken 30 years ago. It was December.
Tell us about your place, Joe.
Well, basically in the chute over here, so there ain't much over here to think with storage. But I've been here about 6 months now. Well, it's basically little foam rubber and a piece of carpet. Like I said, I keep my bedroll all that train station.
Say about how you keep it at the train station. How does that work?
Well, you put 75 cents in the lock and you get your key, and then whenever you're ready to go back, before like say 10 o'clock at night, you just get your stuff and carry it out here. Like that movie Treadle case, that's what I was looking at. That's when I lost my 2 square feet.
Oh, yeah?
Sucker punched me when I was sleeping. But the Broadway pipe on the other side of the river. We can't get over there because the third road, they know you get stuck.
But was he trying to get your place here?
Huh?
Was he trying to get your place?
Well, over there, yeah.
Oh, but not here.
No. Here I got the river brook.
So as you can see, I was still learning how to shoot a camera. I had some snow on the lens, and it was waving around. And it was a little because it was about this high. But I learned so much from Joe that day. So what he was saying about the locker, he had tried the bus station locker. There you put in 75 cents, you come back an hour and a half later and they charge you $2.50, and they say, but it's only 70, you say it's only 75 cents. But if you want your stuff, you've got to pay $2.50. So he uses a train station. And what became quickly apparent is that all homeless people need a safe place to store their stuff. So one of the things that I've never done, and maybe you can find a way of doing it, I think it'd be an easy thing. Nothing is ever easy, but not all that difficult. To find an abandoned building somewhere, find some homeless people who are natural entrepreneurs or have been, and set up a small locker business. One of the things that came out of this, when we looked at homeless people as consumers, and at that time there were about 2,000 of them, and they were making about $500. That's a lot of money. And one of the things that they were spending it on, not they themselves, but because there are a lot of psychiatric patients, a lot of them were on medication. A lot of the chronically mentally ill were. So we started a pharmacy that was partially owned by patients in Boulder, Colorado. And we had to figure out a whole way of doing this. We hired a pharmacist. And it's still running and earning about $100,000 a year. And some of these are not all homeless people, but some of the people who have been on medications for a long time are very effective drug counselors. These people are very goosey about talking about side effects and so on. And so those are a couple of ideas. Now, after I went with Joe to where he cooked his food on an old grill, where he drank, where he bought his booze, to the locker, and then we went to the White Spot on Spear and First, and just had some coffee and we talked. And here is a little clip of Joe talking about ear banging. his term.
You're talking about ear banging. What do you mean by that? Preaching. You know, it's okay in little business to keep on everybody you go on the soup kitchen. You get preached at left and right. I mean, like on Sunday, you go, if you stay in places, you go for breakfast there in the morning, you get an hour and a half preaching, okay? And then like say, after that place closed up, you go to the hospitality center. They give you an hour of preaching for a cup of coffee. An hour and a half you're staying there for a snack lunch. And then after that, the salary fees about 3 o'clock on Sunday, but you gotta go through another one of them for an hour to get the stuff they serve, which I call basically slop. What do you do for that hour and a half? Do the daydream? Yeah. Sit and let them do their thing.
So that's Joe and ear banging. Now here's a more recent one, but it's a real rough cut. Totally different thing. It's about a month ago. We went to Uganda, where the Gates Foundation had a problem with a project there. Small farmers in remote areas, their milk spoiled. So we were looking about the possibility, which we're now in the process of designing, talk about a different thing, a UV milk sterilizer for about $100 that'll zap 200 liters of milk right out of the cow. And if it works, bring the bacteria count down to about the same as pasteurization. And we do that as a business with one of the entrepreneurial dairy farmers zapping his milk. If you have 13 hours to sell your milk rather than 3, you can get a lot better price for it. So here is a little clip of talking to milk traders. A lot of these farmers sold their milk to bicycle traders.
How does it get here from the farmers? What's the farthest distance? 12 miles.
This
Does
is
the farmer bring his own milk?
It's a manager of the chilling plant.
Do some of them use a motorcycle? All bicycle. And the bicycle carries 70 liters, 100 liters, how much?
Yes.
So they bring it by bicycle, and what containers do the bicycle use? Like these, right? When they empty the can, do they wash it out with a disinfectant, or what do they do?
They use bar soap.
So they take bar soap.
Okay, so here's the kind of stuff we learned. And this was an 8-day trip in the field. We were originally going to really treat the milk intensively with UV, sterilize it like UHT milk. There's a lot of UHT milk which you can keep for 6 months without spoiling. But to do that, you have to have very sterile conditions. So we thought, we'll take a motorcycle with a trailer. Somebody will zap the milk. We'll put it in bags and seal it, and then they'll take it right to the market. Absolutely impossible. They're supposed to use only stainless steel. Of course, they use plastic because it's far too expensive. Some of those plastic 20-liter containers, the screw top lid is broken. They take a piece of plastic, and they put an elastic around it. When we interviewed, when I filmed a woman milking, she had been trained. She took a cup of water, she took some soap, she washed the udder with soap. There's one problem. When I asked her where she got the water, it was from the river, and the river was totally contaminated. So there's no way you can keep sterile conditions on farms. So that's why we went then to not doing that, using their own containers. But the thing of it is, when you ask how they washed them out after they used the milk, you heard that answer. You cut up a bar of soap, throw some water in there, around, and well, that doesn't work. So we had to add a way of generating chlorine from passing a current through salt water, so that you have a source of bleach. But what I'm saying is, what I'm trying to point out is just an elaboration of what you were saying. You've got to design is customer driven. So let me just go through the rest of these points. Think and act big. If you go to a village, as many of you have done, imagine you had that experience. If you really talk to people in the village, you'll quickly identify 20 problems that are solvable. But it takes a lot of time and energy to solve a problem. If you're going to solve a problem, why not pick out of those the problems that apply to 1,000 villages? So think big. I've started this new company. We're only dealing with products that can transform a whole field. And because this is essentially in what in business you'd call a virgin market, there are a lot of those opportunities. Then think like a child. Some people think is the opposite of thinking big, but it isn't. Children get the lateral thinking somehow, they lose it by the time they're 15. The educational people tell me that you have that lateral thinking capacity, something like 85% before the age of 5, and it's down to 6% or something like that. What is it? Somehow, whether it's culture or education, you need that kind of lateral thinking and going right to the heart of a problem. Somehow I've been able to retain a lot of that because I have fun. I don't know what it is, but you can do that. But you have to think like a child. And the other thing is see and do the obvious. The fact that most of poverty, dollar-a-day poverty, is linked to 1-acre farms is really obvious, but people just don't see it. Next ones are fairly straightforward. If somebody already invented it, you don't have to. It's easy on Google to do it. We could check all the literature on ways of sterilizing milk and so on. Price is critical. When I teach design courses, I talk about I steal Vince Lombardi's line. Vince Lombardi was the coach of the Green Bay Packers. He said, winning isn't everything, it's the only thing. I say, affordability isn't everything, it's the only thing. Affordability is the critical design criterion for designing tools that work. And then the next one is simply that I believe you have to be impact-driven. So many projects are done with good intentions, but nobody ever even thinks about what the specific impact is that they want the project to create, or does anything to see if the project did make that impact. The other, the last three, design to practical 3-year plans. Most businesses know that. You can have a wonderful world-changing idea, but if you don't have very detailed implementation plans for the next 3 years, you're going to fail. Keep learning from your customers. I talk to farmers before, during, and after. And any good organization, any good business does that. We should do that when we're working on poverty. And the final one, stay positive. Don't be distracted by what other people think. When I was working on coming up with low-cost drip irrigation, people said, that's a waste of time. If it really was useful, the market would have already filled the need. Not true. And a lot of I've also stuck with things long past the point of failure. But the thing of it is, you have to have stubborn tenacity because it takes a long time to make these things work. So the next session is a little bit on design and a little bit on the new work that I'm doing, because I handed over IDE to I had a succession plan after 25 years. It's now run by a new CEO, and I've started 2 new organizations. So what I've got left up here to talk about is the design process as one thing, and about these 2 new organizations. And we can blow that off and just talk the rest of the time. What would you like to do? Huh? See some of it? Okay, then the compromise is I'll do it fast. Yes, sir.
We can find you a slot tomorrow afternoon if you'd be willing to give the rest of, as Paul Harvey would say, the rest of your
The
story
rest of the story.
without rushing
Yeah, no, I can do that.
Q&A now. That'd be okay?
That'd be all right. Can people come to that, or can we? Should I do that, or no? All right. Here's the compromise. I'll do it in 3 minutes. I'll do it real fast. You won't understand a thing, and it won't hurt. To me, design is creative problem solving. It's not engineering. It's not it's not. It's creative problem solving. 90% of today's designers spend all their time solving the problems of the richest 10% of the world's customers. This is the kind of thing they come up with. And my contention is that you need a revolution in design to reverse this silly ratio. Design is a process of creative problem solving. And here, somebody asked over here, have you done other things? Here's what a drip irrigation system looks like, a simple one. Cut the cost of Netafim or the modern drip irrigation to about 1/3. Here is a farmer in Nepal with a simple gravity tank and some lines coming out of it. This is actually the son of Krishna Bahadur Thapa. Krishna bought his first drip system for $26. His family was living on $50 or $100, but they grew enough rice most years to feed themselves. From that $26 investment, he made $500 by growing off-season cucumber and cauliflower, and he never looked back. 5 years later, they were earning $4,800 from a variety of things, more than a lot of our IDE staff. He had milk. He was growing goats. He bought some oranges. They had a little fish pond. He was actually lending money to his neighbors. This is a drip system in a little bit bigger field. Water storage is a big thing. A gentleman talked about Africa. Low-cost water storage is huge all over the world. Simple way of doing it. You can store 200,000 liters of water for about $400 by digging a pit, putting a plastic lining in it, and covering it with plastic. We're working on the design of that in India right now. This is one of the things where we started. It's a $40, 10,000 liters system. That's about 2,500 gallons. It looks like a giant condom. It's basically 1 meter in diameter, 10 meters long. The inside is a polyethylene tube. The outside layer is like a fertilizer bag. It's reinforced plastic. And it's put inside an earthen trench so that you can cheat on the materials you need for the walls because the earth provides the support. You capture the water from that roof. This guy has a very primitive system. He's got a thatch roof. You see he's got a plastic there that catches that water, and then over at the end it goes inside. You bunch the plastic at the end like a sausage around that 2-inch PVC pipe, and that's both the inlet and the outlet. And the water comes from the roof and fills that thing. Or you can, in a lot of places where the water is too deep to pump, and the pumps are too expensive, you can harvest rainwater during the rainy season, store it, but you've got to store it enclosed because the highest value crops are in the dry season. So you got to be able to store it for 6 months. If you just make a pond, that would be easy, but it'll all evaporate. Now, I've started 2 new organizations. One is DREV, Design Revolution, to foment the revolution in design to reach the other 90%. What we're doing is, for instance, I've been working at Stanford on a course called Design for Extreme Affordability for 4 years. It's worked out very well. Design teams, multidisciplinary design teams every year, go to the village, define a problem, come back, and at the end of the course, they've got to come up with a breakthrough product. They've got to do it with a multidisciplinary process. It's not just engineering or business. It's teams of students from engineering, business, humanities, and health sciences. And then they got to come up with a business plan and a communications pitch. And the business plan has to be saleable to an investor. A lot of those students have gone on and formed companies and are working, continuing to work on the products. This is one of those students operating a typical Burmese sprinkler system. This is where hundreds of thousands of people use this in Burma. And here's one of the products of one of those design teams. It's a $25 premature infant incubator. Those things go for 8 to 10 grand here. In rural areas, there's no electricity. They just took a sleeping bag, took a phase change material like you put in an ice chest. You put it in your freezer, only they used wax. You hold some hot water, a vessel of hot water against the wax. It melts. You put it in the sleeping bag, and the infant is kept warm for 5 hours. Then the mother holds them against her skin while you recharge. These things, all of these things, you don't have to be an engineer even, although you need some engineering to pick the right phase change material. These students won $125,000 in prize money. They're out raising more money. They formed a company, and they're going to manufacture and market this in India. D100 is an initiative that this nonprofit is helping create with NCIIA. The organization, Phil Weilerstein is heading it. And we're going to do the same program in 100 schools, of which 50 will be in developing countries, because people don't know how to design tools that work, affordable tools. And if that works, we'll have 3,000 people with those skills every year. Now, the second organization I started, this is 7 months ago, so it's still a startup. We're looking for venture capital money. We'll have the investment documents in a couple of weeks. And it's based on this. Some of you may be familiar with Muhammad Yunus's book. He talked about the social business. It's a business where the investors get their money back but no return. On the other hand, Bill Gates talked about creative capitalism, where multinational organizations will serve the bottom billion because of the social status and the various rewards. In my opinion, those are important niche markets, but they'll never make the huge impact. Multinationals will only enter the bottom billion market seriously when somebody demonstrates that you can make attractive bottom line profits doing it. So that's what we're setting out to do. We've got 3 breakthrough products. The company is Windhorse International. That's what we're trying to do. Here's an example. You can generate chlorine from a thimbleful of salt water by running a current through it. Doesn't take much current, that chlorine, and that's been used in large scale. A company called Myox, their system starts at $10,000. It's used for a big water treatment system. We've dumbed down that unit to $50. Combine it with some water tanks, and we're designing a $300 water kiosk capable of producing 5,000 to 10,000 liters of safe drinking water. We'll hire women as entrepreneurs. Total capital cost for the kiosk target is $300. All of these things should show a 1 to 3 month payout. We hope to earn, that the entrepreneur earns $150 a month from selling water, and that the company earns $100 a month from providing a whole range of services. This is a $350 microscope that can do fluorescent microscopy. That makes it possible for local clinics to do diagnosis of malaria and TB with rapid turnaround for $2 a pop and make money doing it. This is probably the most radical of these things, and you can't really see what it is, but it's designed to lower the effective cost of photovoltaic electricity from $4 a watt wholesale to $1 a watt by concentrating sunlight, just like solar cookers do. But this is a J-shaped reflector made out of plywood backed by Mylar. You need one about the size of a 4x8 sheet of plywood to concentrate energy on a 200 watt system that will cost $200 wholesale instead of $4 or $5 a watt. That'll be then the basis of, again, micro 10 to 50,000 micro utility micro franchises. So you get the picture. We don't have to go into it in much detail. Thank you very much for listening.